I never expected that a late-night sandwich delivery would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It wasn't just about the food, though I was starving. It was about the person who brought it, in a single, bizarre, unforgettable moment that rewired my entire understanding of connection. Sometimes the biggest shifts in your world start with the smallest, most unexpected gestures. My name is Miles. At the time, I was 28 and working as a junior architect at a firm that believed sleep was a suggestion, not a requirement. My life was a predictable rhythm of deadlines, blueprints, and lukewarm coffee from the office machine. I lived in a clean, minimalist apartment that was more a place to crash than a home. My days were structured and my nights were often spent staring at a computer screen, moving lines and shapes around until they resembled a building. It was a life of quiet routine, and if I was being honest with myself, a life of quiet loneliness. The one bright spot in my daily grind was lunch. Specifically, lunch from The Carver, a small, family-owned delicatessen just 2 blocks from my office. It was the kind of place that smelled of baking bread and roasting meat, a warm, savory pocket of reality in a neighborhood of cold glass and steel. And the main reason I went there, day after day, was Caleb. Let me try to describe Caleb. He was the kind of guy who seemed effortlessly comfortable in his own skin. Tall, with broad shoulders and strong arms that were dusted with flour by mid-morning. He had warm, dark eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and a smile that could disarm a hostile client presentation. He moved with a practiced, easy grace behind the counter, slicing turkey, spreading mustard, and wrapping sandwiches with a speed and precision that was almost hypnotic. To me, he was this beacon of simple, confident masculinity. He'd chat with the construction workers about the game, compliment an elderly woman on her new haircut, and remember my order before I even opened my mouth. A turkey and Swiss on rye, extra pickles, light on the mayo. He'd slide it across the counter with a nod and that easy smile. The usual for you, Miles. Hearing him say my name sent a ridiculous, unprofessional jolt through me every single time. It was just customer service, I knew that. He probably knew the names of 100 regulars. But in my head, it felt different. It felt like a small, private acknowledgement in the middle of a busy lunch rush. I saw the way women, and sometimes men, looked at him. He was universally, objectively attractive. And in my mind, he was completely, untouchably straight. He was a friendly, handsome deli guy, and I was just another customer. That was the beginning and end of our story. Or so I thought. I had built this entire narrative around him, a character in the background of my life. He was the guy who probably had a pretty girlfriend he took to baseball games on the weekends. The guy who could fix a car engine and build a deck with his bare hands. He was everything I felt I was not. Grounded, physical, effortlessly social. I, on the other hand, lived in a world of abstractions, of angles and load-bearing calculations. My hands were for keyboards and drafting pencils, not for kneading dough or, well, anything else interesting. So, I kept our interactions brief and professional. I'd order my sandwich, pay, and offer a polite, thank you. I'd watch him from my small table by the window, admiring the way he interacted with the world so easily. It was a harmless little crush, a silent appreciation for a person who brought a bit of warmth into my otherwise sterile day. It was something to look forward to, a predictable and safe little thrill. I never, in a million years, imagined it would become anything more. That was my ordinary world, a world of distance, observation, and sandwiches I didn't really need but bought anyway, just for a 2-minute interaction that I would then overanalyze for the rest of the afternoon. It's funny how you can get so used to a certain level of quiet desperation that you start to mistake it for contentment. The inciting incident, the thing that knocked my carefully ordered life off its axis, came on a Tuesday night in October. We had a massive project deadline, a proposal for a new city library that my boss was determined to win. The entire team had been pulling 14-hour days for a week straight. The office was a wasteland of empty coffee cups, crumpled sketches, and the low, persistent hum of computers that never slept. By 9 in the evening, I was the only one left. My boss had finally gone home, leaving me with the final task of compiling all the renderings into the presentation portfolio. It was tedious, mind-numbing work. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, and my stomach was a hollow, aching pit. I'd been so focused that I'd completely forgotten about dinner. I looked at my watch. 9:15. Everything nearby would be closed. The grim reality of another meal from the sad little office vending machine was starting to set in. I was picturing a bag of stale pretzels and a chalky granola bar when a thought sparked in my brain: the Carver. I knew they closed at 9, but maybe, just maybe, someone was still there cleaning up. It was a long shot, a desperate Hail Mary from a man on the verge of eating ketchup packets for sustenance. My hand was shaking slightly as I pulled up their number on my phone. I felt ridiculous. Who calls a deli 15 minutes after they've closed to beg for a sandwich? It felt entitled and pathetic. But my hunger won out over my pride. I pressed the call button and listened to it ring, fully expecting it to go to voicemail. 1 ring, 2 rings. On the third, just as I was about to hang up, someone answered. The voice was low and slightly breathless. The Carver, we're closed. It was him. It was Caleb. My own breath hitched in my throat. I suddenly felt like a teenager calling their crush for the first time. Oh, hi. Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry to bother you. I stammered, my voice sounding thin and reedy. This is Miles. I work at the architecture firm a couple blocks away. There was a pause on the other end. For a second, I thought he'd hung up. Miles, he said, and the way he said it was different from how he said it across the counter. It was slower, more thoughtful. The turkey and Swiss guy. My heart did a stupid little flip. Yeah, that's me. I took a deep breath and just laid it all out. Look, I know this is a huge ask, but I'm stuck at the office on a crazy deadline and I haven't eaten all day. I'm about to pass out. I was just hoping, on the off chance, you hadn't put everything away yet. I can pay double, triple, whatever. I cringed at how desperate I sounded. I could hear the sound of him moving around, a clatter of something metal in the background. I imagined him, wiping down the stainless steel counters, ready to lock up and go home. I was an idiot for even asking. Forget it, I said quickly. It's a stupid request. I'm really sorry for bothering you. Have a good night. Wait, he said, his voice cutting through my self-recrimination. Don't hang up. Another pause. I could hear him sigh, but it didn't sound annoyed. It sounded different. Turkey and Swiss on rye, extra pickles, light mayo, he asked, reciting my order from memory. Yes, I breathed, hope surging through me. That's the one. And you're at the office? The big glass building on the corner of Elm and 6th. Yeah, 4th floor. All right, he said, and I could practically hear the smile in his voice now. Don't move. I'll run it over in about 10 minutes. And don't worry about paying double. Just owe me 1 inch. Before I could properly thank him, or even process what was happening, he had hung up. I stood there in the silent, empty office, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. Caleb. Caleb was making me a sandwich after hours, and he was bringing it to me. The quiet routine of my life had just been shattered, and all it took was one desperate, hungry phone call. My stomach was still growling, but now it was doing it in a chorus with 1,000 fluttering butterflies. The 10 minutes I waited for Caleb to arrive felt longer than the entire work week. I paced the length of my office, a nervous energy thrumming through my veins that had nothing to do with the project I was supposed to be finishing. I tidied my desk, shoving stray papers into neat piles. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to smooth it down. I even considered splashing some water on my face in the men's room to look less like a sleep-deprived mole person. Why did I care so much? He was just delivering a sandwich. It was a kind gesture, an act of exceptional customer service, nothing more. But my brain, my traitorous, overthinking brain, refused to accept that simple explanation. It was busy spinning this small act of kindness into a grand romantic gesture. He remembered my order. He knew where I worked. He was walking 2 blocks in the dark, after a long day, just for me. My internal monologue was running wild, a chaotic mix of hope and self-doubt. When the security buzzer on my desk finally chirped, I jumped as if I'd been electrocuted. I pressed the button to unlock the main doors, my voice trembling slightly as I said, Miles here. Expecting a delivery, I walked to the elevator, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and there he was. He looked different outside the context of the deli. He had on a dark gray hoodie instead of his work apron, and the softer light of the office lobby made his features seem less sharp, more gentle. He was holding a small white paper bag, and he offered me that same easy smile, though it seemed a little more subdued this time, maybe a little hesitant. Hey, he said, his voice quiet in the echoing space. Late night. You have no idea. I laughed, the sound coming out a bit shaky. Thank you so much for this. Seriously, you are a lifesaver. It's no problem, he said, handing me the bag. Our fingers brushed as I took it, a spark of contact that felt far more significant than it should have. The bag was still warm. I was just closing up anyway. We stood there for a moment in an awkward silence, the hum of the elevator the only sound. This was it. This was the first time we'd ever spoken for more than 30 seconds, without a counter and a line of people between us. Well, I should, let you get going, I said, already mentally kicking myself for not being able to think of something more interesting to say. Thanks again. I really appreciate it. He just nodded, but he didn't move to leave. He looked around the lobby, then back at me. So this is where you build things, he said, more a statement than a question. Something like that, I replied. Mostly I just stare at a screen and move lines around until they look right. The self-deprecating humor was a defense mechanism, a way to downplay the passion I actually had for my work. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. I get that. Sometimes I feel like all I do is move meat and cheese around until it looks right. We shared a small smile at the comparison. It was a simple moment, but it felt connective. It was like we'd found a tiny sliver of common ground. You know, he started, shoving his hands into the pockets of his hoodie. I've always been fascinated by architecture. How you can imagine something in your head and then make it real, make it a place people can actually be in. It's like building with ideas. I was floored. I had him pegged as a sports and beer kind of guy. I never would have guessed he'd have a thoughtful, almost poetic take on my profession. My carefully constructed image of him began to crack. That's a really good way of putting it, I said, genuinely impressed. Most people just ask if I can get them a discount on building materials. He laughed again, a fuller sound this time. Well, I do some woodworking on the side. Just small stuff. Boxes, picture frames. So I guess I appreciate the craft of it. A woodworker. Of course. It made perfect sense. The strong, capable hands, the attention to detail. But it also added a new layer to him, an artistic, creative side I hadn't anticipated. The untouchable Deli guy was suddenly becoming a much more complex, much more interesting person. We talked for another few minutes, about the library project, about the different types of wood he liked to work with. The conversation was easy, flowing in a way I never would have predicted. For the first time, I wasn't just a customer, and he wasn't just the guy who made my lunch. We were just two people, talking in a quiet lobby late on a Tuesday night. The sandwich, the whole reason he was there, sat forgotten in my hand, its warmth slowly seeping away. And I found I didn't care about the food at all anymore. I just wanted to keep him talking. The moment that changed everything happened right there in the sterile, fluorescent-lit lobby of my office building. We had been talking for maybe 10 minutes, a small island of warmth and easy conversation in the vast, empty sea of the night. The initial awkwardness had melted away, replaced by a comfortable curiosity. I was learning about the grain of cherry wood, and he was learning about the challenges of designing a public space. It felt surprisingly normal, and yet completely extraordinary. But my stomach, betraying the intellectual connection my brain was so happily forging, let out a loud, mortifying growl. It echoed in the quiet space, a primitive reminder of why he was there in the first place. I blushed furiously, a wave of heat creeping up my neck. Sorry, I mumbled, gesturing with the white paper bag. I guess my body is reminding me to thank you properly and actually eat this thing. Caleb just laughed, a deep, genuine sound that made me feel a little less embarrassed. Yeah, probably a good idea. Wouldn't want you to faint before you finish that presentation. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms over his chest in a relaxed pose, clearly in no hurry to leave. It felt like he was giving me permission to eat in front of him, turning this from a delivery into a shared experience. My hands felt clumsy as I opened the bag. I was suddenly hyper-aware of him watching me. The familiar smell of fresh rye bread and pickles filled the air, and my hunger returned with a vengeance. I unwrapped the sandwich from its wax paper, my fingers fumbling with the tape. The construction was perfect, just as it always was. A generous stack of turkey, a layer of Swiss cheese, and a neat row of pickled chips, their green edges peeking out. I was so ravenous, so utterly focused on taking that first bite, that I lifted it to my mouth too quickly. My exhausted, clumsy brain misjudged the angle, the weight, the structural integrity of the sandwich. It was a catastrophic failure of basic physics. A dollop of mayonnaise, along with two perfectly crisp pickle slices, dislodged from their rye bread home and tumbled through the air in what felt like slow motion. My life didn't flash before my eyes, but a litany of curses did. I watched, helpless, as the little blob of food plummeted towards the pristine, polished floor of the lobby. It was over. The perfect sandwich was compromised. My dignity was in tatters. But it never hit the ground. In a move so swift and instinctive it barely registered, Caleb's hand shot out. He uncrossed his arms and swooped in, his palm cupping underneath the falling food, catching the mayo and pickles just inches from the floor. It was an incredible reflex, like a shortstop snagging a line drive. He stood up straight, his hand open. There, in the center of his palm, sat the rescued food. A slightly messy, but otherwise unharmed, pile of sandwich filling. We both just stared at it for a second, the absurdity of the moment hanging in the air between us. My brain was short-circuiting. I should have said thank you and told him to just throw it away. That was the normal, sane, socially acceptable thing to do. But I was tired and hungry and completely mesmerized by the strange intimacy of what had just happened. He had saved a part of my dinner. Caleb looked from his hand to my face, a strange expression in his eyes. It was a mix of amusement and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. A corner of his mouth twitched upwards into a half-smile. "Waste not, want not," he said, his voice a low murmur. And then, he did something that completely stopped my world. He stepped closer to me, closing the small space between us. He used the thumb of his other hand to gently scoop up the pickles and the dollop of mayo from his palm. And before my brain could process what was happening, before I could protest or react or even breathe, he lifted his thumb to my lips. Time seemed to stretch and warp. All I could see was his hand, his thumb, coming towards my face. All I could feel was the warmth radiating from his body, now just inches from mine. My mouth opened on pure instinct, a reflexive response to the offering. His thumb gently pressed against my lower lip, depositing the pickles and mayo directly into my mouth. The skin of his thumb was warm and slightly rough. The taste was a shocking explosion of dill and creaminess. For a split second, the only thing connecting us was this bizarre, tender, and impossibly intimate act of feeding me. My eyes were locked on his, and in that moment, the playful amusement was gone, replaced by that same unreadable intensity. The air crackled with a meaning that had nothing to do with sandwiches. He pulled his hand away slowly, his thumb leaving a faint, tingling trail on my lip. His eyes searched mine, as if asking a question I didn't know how to answer. The lobby, the deadline, the entire city outside seemed to dissolve, leaving only the two of us in this bubble of profound, unspoken communication. He had just fed me, off his thumb, and it was the most intimate thing I had ever experienced. The moment shattered as quickly as it had formed. Caleb seemed to snap back to himself, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as if he was just now realizing what he'd done. A faint blush rose on his cheeks, a startling contrast to his usually unflappable demeanor. He took a half-step back, breaking the magnetic pull that had held us in place. He stammered, rubbing the back of his neck with the hand he hadn't just put in my mouth. I should get going. It's late." His voice was rough, strained. The easy confidence he normally wore like a second skin had completely evaporated, leaving him looking vulnerable and just as flustered as I felt. I could only nod, my throat too tight to form words. I was still tasting the pickle, still feeling the phantom touch of his skin on my lips. My brain was a frantic scramble of question marks and exclamation points. What was that? What just happened? Was that flirting? Was that something else entirely? Right. I finally managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper. Yeah, of course. He gave me one last, fleeting look, his eyes filled with a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't begin to unpack. Then he turned on his heel and walked swiftly towards the glass doors, not looking back. I watched him go, a silhouette disappearing into the dark street, leaving me alone in the too bright lobby with a half-eaten sandwich and a heart that was beating like a drum solo. I didn't finish the presentation that night. I couldn't. I just sat at my desk, the sandwich lying uneaten on its paper wrapper, and replayed the scene in the lobby over and over again in my mind. Every detail was seared into my memory. The swiftness of his catch, the low murmur of his voice saying, "Waste not, want not," the warmth of his thumb against my lip. The aftermath was a state of pure, unadulterated confusion. My mind became a courtroom where hope and fear were the opposing attorneys, arguing their cases with relentless fervor. Hope, the flashy prosecutor, presented the evidence with gusto. He stayed late to make you a sandwich. He delivered it himself. He remembered your name and your order. And the thumb, Exhibit A, the thumb, that was not a normal act of customer service. Fear, the more cautious and methodical defense attorney, countered every point. It was just kindness. He's a nice guy? He felt sorry for you. The thumb thing was weird, a brain fart, an impulsive gesture he immediately regretted. Look at how he ran away. He was embarrassed. He probably thinks you're a freak now. This internal debate raged for the next 2 days. I was a wreck. At work, I stared blankly at my computer screen, the lines of my blueprints blurring into meaningless squiggles. I drank coffee I didn't taste and attended meetings I didn't hear. My colleagues asked if I was feeling okay, and I'd just nod and blame it on the deadline. But the truth was, I was completely consumed by the thumb incident, as it came to be known in the halls of my mind. The biggest and most immediate consequence was that I couldn't bring myself to go to the Carver for lunch. The thought of facing Caleb across that counter, of having to order a sandwich and pretend that the most bizarrely intimate moment of my life hadn't happened between us, was paralyzing. What would I say? What would he do? Would he be cold and professional, trying to erase the memory? Would he be awkward? Would he make a joke about it, turning it into something trivial? I couldn't bear any of those possibilities. So, I avoided the deli. On Wednesday, I forced down another sad vending machine meal. On Thursday, I walked 10 blocks in the opposite direction to a generic chain sandwich shop where the bread was spongy and the pickles were limp. It was a miserable experience. The food was terrible, and my mind was still back at the Carver, picturing Caleb behind the counter, wondering if he noticed my absence. Did he even care that I wasn't there? Was he relieved? Was he wondering where the turkey and Swiss guy had gone? This line of questioning was a special kind of torture. The not knowing was infinitely worse than a definitive rejection. My imagination filled the vacuum with 1,000 different scenarios, most of them ending with me being the subject of a hilarious, weird customer story he told his friends. By Friday, I couldn't take it anymore. The avoidance felt cowardly, and the suspense was eating me alive. I had to know. I had to go back. I needed to see his face, to gauge his reaction, to get some kind of sign that would tell me whether I had imagined the whole thing or if that spark, that tension in the lobby, was real. I rehearsed the entire interaction on the walk over. I would be casual. I would be breezy. I would walk in, smile politely, and order my usual as if nothing had happened. It was a simple plan, a solid plan. And it fell apart the second I walked through the door and the little bell above it chimed. He was there, standing behind the counter, slicing a brisket. He looked up when the bell rang, and his eyes met mine. For a split second, his hand stilled. His expression was guarded, unreadable. The easy, welcoming smile he gave every other customer was gone. In its place was a look of neutral, professional attentiveness. My heart sank into my stomach. Fear was screaming, "I told you so," in my mental courtroom. It was over. He was treating me like any other stranger, putting up a wall. I had made it all up. I walked to the counter, my feet feeling like they were encased in lead. The usual lunchtime chatter of the deli faded into a dull roar in my ears. The only thing I was aware of was the space between us, which suddenly felt like a vast and uncrossable canyon. "Hi," I said, my voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerated display case. "Hey," he replied, his tone flat. He wiped his hands on his apron and turned to face me fully. "What can I get for you?" The casual question felt like a punch to the gut. "What can I get for you?" Not the usual. He was erasing our history, resetting our relationship back to its factory settings. The hope that had been a flickering flame within me was extinguished, leaving behind a cold, bitter smoke. I had my answer. It was nothing. It meant nothing. By Friday evening, I had resigned myself to a state of perpetual awkwardness. I had my answer from Caleb's professional distance, and the answer was a resounding no. I had officially ruined my favorite lunch spot. My plan was to find a new one, somewhere far away, and to slowly forget about warm smiles and the phantom touch of a thumb on my lip. But as I was packing up my things to leave the office, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. My heart gave a little lurch of irrational hope before I squashed it back down. It was probably just a spam message. I opened it anyway. The message was short, just 6 words. "Are you working late again tonight?" I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my chest. It couldn't be. How would he have my number? Then I remembered. I had called the Deli from my cell phone on Tuesday night. He must have saved it. My mind started racing. Why would he text me? Was he making fun of me? Was this some kind of trap? Against my better judgment, my fingers flew across the screen, typing a reply before I could talk myself out of it. "No, just leaving now." "What?" The response came back almost instantly. "Stay there. I'm coming over." My blood ran cold, then hot. There was no explanation, no context, just a command. This was either going to be the most humiliating confrontation of my life, or something else. I had no idea which. For 20 agonizing minutes, I sat at my desk, my bag packed, my coat on, just waiting. Every footstep in the hallway made me jump. Finally, the familiar buzz came from the front desk. I let him in and met him at the elevators, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it. He was dressed in jeans and a plain black t-shirt, no apron, no hoodie. He was just Caleb, and he looked incredibly nervous. The cool, professional mask from lunchtime was gone, replaced by a raw, uncertain tension that mirrored my own. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Hi," I replied. We stood in silence for a moment, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. He was the one who broke it, his words coming out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them in for days. "Look, I have to apologize. I was a jerk today at the deli." I was so surprised I could only shake my head. "No, you weren't. You were just at work." "No," he insisted, looking me straight in the eye. The intensity was back, that same focused gaze from the lobby. "I was a jerk. I saw you come in, and I panicked. I've been panicking ever since Tuesday night." My own panic began to subside, replaced by a dawning, fragile sense of hope. "Why?" I whispered, needing to hear him say it. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "Because of what I did. In the lobby. Feeding you. Like that." He winced slightly as he said it, as if the memory was embarrassing. It was weird. I know it was weird. It was impulsive and strange, and I walked away from it feeling like a complete idiot. I thought I must have freaked you out." "You didn't freak me out," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "Well, I freaked myself out," he admitted with a short, humorless laugh. "I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then when you didn't come in for 2 days, I figured I'd really screwed up, that I'd made you so uncomfortable you couldn't even come get a sandwich anymore. So when you came in today, I just froze. I put up this wall because I was embarrassed and I didn't know what to say." Everything he was saying was a direct contradiction to the narrative of rejection I had spent the last 2 days perfecting in my head. He hadn't been cold because he wasn't interested. He had been cold because he was. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. "Caleb," I started, my voice thick with emotion. "I didn't come in because I thought I had made you uncomfortable. I was the one who was freaking out, thinking I had misread everything." A look of profound relief washed over his face. The tension in his shoulders seemed to visibly release. "You're kidding me," he breathed. "So we've both been hiding from each other for 2 days because we both thought the other person was weirded out." I let out a shaky laugh. "It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud." "It is ridiculous," he said, and for the first time that night, a real, genuine smile spread across his face. He took a step closer, and this time, I didn't back away. "The truth is, Miles, I've wanted to talk to you, really talk to you, for months. I just never had a reason to, or the guts. That's why I brought you the sandwich on Tuesday. It was an excuse." "An excuse?" "Yeah. To see you outside of the 30 seconds you're at the counter. To see if, I don't know, to see if this feeling I had was real." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "And then that whole thing with the pickle happened. And for 1 second, it just felt right. It felt natural. And then my brain caught up and started screaming at me about how insane it was. But the feeling was real. All the fear, all the anxiety I had been carrying around for days, just evaporated. It was replaced by a warm, glowing certainty. I had not imagined it. This was real. He was real. The feeling was real for me, too. I confessed, my voice soft but steady. His smile widened. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before he gently cupped my jaw. His thumb traced the line of my bottom lip, the same place it had been on Tuesday night. This time, there were no pickles, no mayonnaise. There was only his touch, warm and deliberate and full of unspoken promise. "Good," he whispered. "That's very good to know." And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't impulsive or strange. It was slow and gentle and sure. It was a kiss that tasted of relief and rye bread and the beginning of something I had only ever allowed myself to dream about. It was the end of a question and the start of an answer. In the weeks that followed our confession in the office lobby, the world bloomed into color. Life with Caleb was a series of firsts that felt both exhilaratingly new and comfortingly familiar. Our first real date was a walk through a park, where we talked for hours about everything and nothing. I learned about his dream of one day opening his own small woodworking shop. He learned about my secret love for old black and white films. He came over to my apartment, which had always felt more like a sterile display home, and immediately made it feel like a place where someone actually lived. He cooked for me, filling the space with the scent of garlic and basil, and he didn't even make fun of the fact that I only owned one skillet and a mismatched set of plates. We spent a whole weekend on my couch, watching my favorite movies, his arm slung around my shoulder, his presence a warm, solid anchor in my life. Going to the deli was different now, too. There was a secret spark in our interactions, a shared smile over the counter that no one else understood. He'd slip an extra pickle into my sandwich or refuse to let me pay, waving me off with a wink. My lunch break was no longer a brief escape, but a highlight of my day, a small, stolen moment with him. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for so long began to recede. In its place, a quiet confidence started to grow. Caleb had a way of seeing me, of listening to me, that made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. He saw past the quiet, cautious architect and found someone worth knowing underneath. And in turn, I saw past the handsome, confident deli guy and found a kind, creative, and wonderfully vulnerable man who was just as nervous about putting himself out there as I was. A few months into our relationship, we were at his place, a cozy apartment above a flower shop that always smelled faintly of sawdust and fresh-cut wood. He was showing me a small, intricately carved box he had just finished. The joints were seamless, the wood polished to a soft sheen. His passion for his craft was captivating. I was running my fingers over the smooth surface when he went to the kitchen to grab us a couple of beers. He came back and handed one to me. As I reached for it, he pulled it back playfully. "Hold on," he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. He opened a bag of chips and took one out, scooping a bit of dip onto it. Then, with a theatrical slowness, he held it up to my mouth. "Waste not, want not," he said, his voice a low, affectionate echo of that night in the lobby. I laughed, a full, happy sound, and took the bite. It was a silly, sweet callback to the moment that had started it all. The gesture wasn't charged with the frantic, uncertain electricity of that first time. Instead, it was filled with the easy intimacy and shared history of two people who had found their way to each other. We were building our own language, made up of sandwiches and woodworking and moments that were ours alone. Looking back, it's funny to think how close I came to letting fear win. I almost let one awkward, beautiful moment scare me away from the best thing that ever happened to me. Life is a series of small, seemingly insignificant events. Most of the time, they pass by unnoticed. But every once in a while, a late-night sandwich, a dropped pickle, and a ridiculously brave gesture can change the entire trajectory of your life. You just have to be willing to taste it, to not let the moment fall to the floor, and to trust that a simple act of connection can be the beginning of everything.